Shabbat Shalom. How did Abu Nasr Yehuda, a Jewish landowner from 11th century Bamiyan, conduct his business affairs with his Muslim neighbors? What was the role of Shuja al-Din Muhammad in the administration of Bamiyan prior to its destruction by Genghis Khan in 1221 of the Common Era? What is Bamiyan? Well, Bamiyan, Afghanistan, is hardly the first place that comes to mind when we think of Jewish life in the Middle Ages. If we've heard of this town in the central Hazar-speaking region, it's likely because of the Bamiyan Buddhas, which were dynamited in March of 2001 by the Taliban on the grounds that they were un-Islamic. But in recent years, we may have been surprised to learn that the territory of Afghanistan, known as Bamiyan, had once been a Buddhist kingdom during the 1st and 2nd centuries of the Common Era, and were surprised again to learn that 9 centuries later, Bamiyan was home to a thriving Jewish community. Obviously, Afghanistan is very much on our minds these few days and weeks, and heaven knows what will come in the weeks and months ahead. But I'm always moved to learn about Jewish history in corners of the world that may have been previously completely unknown to us. The existence of a number of manuscripts that came to light a few years ago was an astonishing discovery that got a little play in the Jewish world and very little, if any, outside of the Jewish world. It was a cache of more than 1,000 manuscripts and fragments discovered reportedly in a cave system in Dara Isuf. It's a district of the Samangan province, just north of the Bamiyan province, situated in the heart of Taliban country. Most of these manuscripts dated to the 12th and 13th centuries of the Common Era, and they range greatly in their subject matter. Now, the exact circumstances of the discovery of these manuscripts still is under a cloud of uncertainty, but the cache of documents came to be known as the Afghan Geniza. Now, some of you have been following our adventures with the Cairo Geniza for the last year, and the Geniza, or a Geniza, as I'll just take a moment to remind, is usually a room or a box or a cabinet in a synagogue where items of religious value had been placed, usually as a stopping off point before they could go to their final proper resting or burial place. Genizot over the centuries were generally for sidurim, for ritual objects, for anything with a scroll or parchment, Torah scrolls, but the Cairo Geniza was particularly remarkable because that amazing room in the Ben Ezra synagogue in Fustat in Old Cairo seemed to be a repository, not an archive, but a junk room for hundreds of thousands of documents of all kinds, love letters, prescriptions, legal documents, and hundreds of thousands of items pertaining to life in medieval Cairo. The Afghan Geniza is distinct in that it was not part of a synagogue, but because the first documents that came to light from it were of a religious nature, it came to be known as the Afghan Geniza. Eli, why don't we close the door? We're picking up some ambient noise. Thanks. A lot of air activity today. Thanks for your patience. And now it's gone. So these documents that came out of purportedly this cave, because it makes it much more romantic to think about a cave discovery, it seems to always be a cave. Think of Qumran and the Dead Sea Scrolls. But these documents, though much fewer, far fewer in nature than the Cairo Geniza, have given a window into life in Jewish Afghanistan that was previously utterly unknown. It's a strange mix of documents. We've got a Jewish prayer next to a fragment of the Quran, a private letter written in Judeo-Persian, which is Persian in Hebrew characters, and a much later tax receipt written in Persian in Arabic script. It's a window into Jewish life along the Silk Road that seems to bind together by its geographical provenance. Many of the documents seem to have been composed by and for individuals from the region of Bamiyan. Now, who were these people? We know very little about their lives and origins of these Jews in eastern Iran. Were they Radhanites, a group of very mysterious overland traders? Or were they Jewish merchants from Babylon who saw an opportunity on the borderlands of the ancient empire? There's been suggestion that they were converts to Judaism who saw affiliation with the Jewish community as tantamount to joining a trade guild. We really don't know for sure, but the two names that have risen to the fore from this cache of Afghan documents were Abu Nasr Yehuda and Shuja al-Din Muhammad. Their names virtually unknown and now suddenly thrown in at least small quarters of Jewish scholarship world into quite a marvelous light and relief. We haven't had much of any Jewish presence in Afghanistan in a very long time. And some of you may have seen news reports this week of concern amid the Taliban's total takeover of Afghanistan, that there is concern over the country's last remaining Jew. Imagine being the last Jew in a country. Hard to wrap one's head around. But 62-year-old Zebulun Simantov, a great name, appears to be the last Jew in Afghanistan. Simantov, recent years, has lived in Kabul's only synagogue. He had said earlier this year that his plan was to leave before the Taliban arrived, ostensibly for Israel. He also had said that the Taliban had jailed him during the fundamentalist Muslim group's last hold on power in Afghanistan, and that they tried to convert him and regard him to this moment as an infidel. Simantov's main language is Dari, the Afghan dialect of Persian. He speaks broken Hebrew, a smattering of English, and some German. He's a bit of maybe a questionable character, but he was involved in a famously bad relationship with Kabul's other remaining Jew. It sounds like the start of a joke. It really isn't. But Ishak Levin, who died in 2005, and Zebulun Simantov had lived at opposite ends of the synagogue in Kabul and reportedly only exchanged curses for years until Levin passed away. According to stories Simantov has told journalists over time, each man went to the Taliban to accuse the other of criminal behavior. It's enough to break your heart. And Simantov said that the two argued so much in prison that the Taliban could bear neither of them and released them both. Though apparently, according to Simantov, the group kept a Torah that Levin and Simantov had both tried to recover. So despite their speaking only in curses or shouting curses to one another from opposite ends of the synagogue, the evolving legends are that they at least had in common an attempt to save a Torah scroll from the Taliban. According to reports just in recent days, the Taliban said that Simantov should have no reason to fear. Just on Tuesday, an Israeli journalist from the Khan Broadcasting Company asked Suhail Shaheen, a Taliban spokesman in Doha, Qatar, whether Simantov would be safe under the Taliban. Shaheen, who apparently was not aware that he was speaking to an Israeli publication, said, "We have no plans to harm minorities. There are Sikhs and Hindus in the country, and they have their religious freedom." I do not know what the fate of Mr. Simantov is at the giving of this drash. And despite some rather questionable dealings, apparently concerning a wife of his who lives in Israel, which we'll just leave unexplored for the moment, as the ancient teaching suggests and exhorts us. Kol Israel arevim ze bazeh. All of Israel is responsible one for the other. Let us keep a good thought, please, for Mr. Simantov as the last Jew in Afghanistan, that he will be safe, that he perhaps will be redeemed and brought out in a very mini but extraordinary exodus, if in fact that is his fate, and that he may come to Israel and do whatever tshuva is required of him to repair any breaches with his family, and to remember that he is embraced and loved as a member of the Jewish people. May he be safe. So though we have not had a minyan's worth of presence in Afghanistan for a very, very long time, let us also pray that the synagogue that he may yet leave behind will also be safe. No guarantees of anything in this world. With the discovery of the, quote, Afghan Geniza, may we also have a window into life in that region, and remember that no matter where we are, nothing is permanent. We are always only passing through. We are all interim. This week's Parsha has a litany of extraordinary teachings. Each one of them is its own chapter or even book on its own. Rabbi Reuben began powerfully with the reminder to not abhor an Edomite, going all the way back to Esau, who was considered to be the father of Edom, later Edom standing in for so many of our never-ending enemies. But do not abhor an Edomite, for such is your kin. And even more so, you should not hate an Egyptian, for you were a stranger in that land. These stern and human reminders, though, not to hate, as easy as it would be to hate the descendants of Esau, to hate our captors in Egypt. There is so much more complexity and nuance to our interhuman and interpersonal and interfamilial relationships. And here the Torah says in no uncertain terms, do not hate. Do not meet hate with hate, for such is destructive and will bring no good. Meet hate with love, with forgiveness, with empathy, with openness to talk and grow and learn and listen, as difficult as that is. So that's where our Torah portion began today. And two of so many powerful mitzvot that pertain perhaps to our relationship with Afghanistan and the people that the United States have been in relationship with for more than 20 torturous years. Deuteronomy chapter 24, verse 14 says, do not abuse a needy and destitute laborer, whether a fellow Israelite or a stranger in one of the communities in your land. You must pay out the wages due on the same day before the sun sets, for the worker is needy and urgently depends on it. Else a cry to the Eternal will be issued against you, and you will incur guilt. I keep thinking of all of the good people in Afghanistan who cast their lot with the United States Armed Forces to help work against the Taliban. And I want to take a moment to pray for those unbelievably courageous people who are marching in defiance of the Taliban at absolute peril of their lives. What bravery that must be taking. But we owe a debt to the people who worked alongside us. I'm thinking of my Uber driver of a few years ago who had managed to get his family out a number of years ago from Afghanistan, but had worked with the Marines there for years, helping to translate, helping to be, in effect, a spy, to provide intelligence to the U.S. Armed Forces. How brave and how beautiful and how fine a human being he clearly was. We owe a debt to the people who've worked alongside us. May it be paid speedily and appropriately, and then some. And then, to quote some of the teachings of my dear teacher, Rabbi Mel Gottlieb, to look at chapter 8, verse 16, which Rabbi Reuben read, you shall not turn over to the master a slave who seeks refuge with you from that master. Such individuals shall live with you in any place they may choose among the settlements in your midst, wherever they please. You must not ill treat the one who was enslaved to cruelty and persecution. Whatever this country can do, this good country, as the Haftarah reminds us, to spread out our tent, to expand our borders, put our tent pegs far away, and open up our doors and our hearts. There ought not to be these kinds of difficulties. I just trained across Montana and North Dakota, all of this open land, even here in our beautiful country and state of California. There is room here if we will but make room in our hearts. I know it's difficult. I know it's daunting. I know it requires selflessness and generosity, and it's not easy even for me to always feel that. So I preach only to myself. But let us keep an open heart and open doors, and somehow, the good people we've elected to lead our country, find a way to pay our debt to those in Afghanistan who helped us try to win what is clearly an unwinnable war. We have a long history in Afghanistan. It may be shrouded to us. We may have but one person left in Afghanistan who identifies as a Jew, but we have connections there as human beings, as Jews, as children of God. May we know peace in our time, and may we see our way forward to a new and brighter day. Shabbat Shalom.